everybody. Welcome to the Newark Museum of Art's Lunch and Learn, this week with our special guest, Saya Woolfalk. And just a word or two about this program. This is a weekly program that we're doing to focus on different aspects of the collection and different aspects of our community. And so you'll want to stay tuned. It's about 45 minutes today and every week when we do it, and we will be back next week. So please keep joining us. My name is Trisha Laughlin Bloom. I'm the curator of American art at the Newark Museum of Art, and I'm excited to introduce Saya to you. Saya is a multidisciplinary artist who has done really extraordinary and innovative immersive installations in museums and public spaces around the country. And she's been working with the Newark Museum of Art on an exciting upcoming project she's going to tell us about. So over to you, Saya.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Trisha. And thanks everyone for tuning in. This is my first virtual artist talk, so hopefully it goes without a hitch. So I'm starting my presentation with an image of a 300-foot LED video that I just did recently for the Oculus at the World Trade Center. And I'm starting with this image because I actually started making large-scale videos like in this way when I was an artist in residence at the Newark Museum in 2012. This is a picture of me and my daughter Aya in the arts workshop, where I made this 360-degree planetarium show with the science department and the art department at the Newark Museum in 2012. It's now a kind of standard way that I work. I make these huge immersive videos, and I also take the motifs that I create in these immersive video installations and bring them into 2 and 3 dimensions. So these are 2 pieces called the cloud skins that are also in the Newark Museum's collection. And they're kind of the foundation for the solo museum show that I'll be doing in the spring of 2021. So in preparation for my exhibition, I've been spending a lot of time at the Newark Museum as an artist in residence for 2020. Obviously, unfortunately, I'm unable to go to the museum right now, but I was spending a lot of time in the landscape gallery, looking at these magnificent Hudson River School paintings. I also spent time with the Herbarium collection. The Newark Museum has an incredible collection of scientific specimens as well as visual art and fine art. And so I would go to the museum, spend time with the landscape gallery, and also spend time drawing actually these specimens from the herbaria. My most recent interaction at the Newark Museum was with a group of fantastic students from Rutgers, Newark. It was Alexandra Chang's Eco Art class. And with them, I kind of talked to them about the landscape gallery, the herbaria, and what it means to kind of collect these specimens for posterity, and what it means to have an archive of plants when those plants may no longer exist in the world. So recently I've kind of relocated to the Catskills, and this is my home studio. This is my desk where I've been painting and looking out at the landscape that inspired a lot of the Hudson River School painters. And I keep thinking about this funny little John Kedor painting, which is a painting of the young artist in the landscape from 1828. And thinking also a lot about this Asher Duran landscape from 1848. It's a kind of magnificent painting that's in the landscape gallery. It presents this kind of unadulterated Eden, a place of possibility, a new burgeoning American identity. But what are the things that it's obscuring? That's kind of what I've been thinking about while I've been up here. I'm immersed in the same land. I'm kind of in this place that has indelibly been kind of impacted in my vision by these Hudson River School landscape paintings. And I've started to kind of do this research to see what else was going on in this region, who else was here, what else was happening? What other stories can I uncover? So this is not actually in the Newark Museum's collection. It's from 1770, and it is called, let's see if I can find my notes here. It is called the Van Bergen Overmantel from 1733. And you can see in this painting that was done before the American Revolution, Native Americans, African slaves, indentured servants, as well as the farm owners in this Catskill region. So it's really different. It's a different presentation than this Durand image. Durand's landscape has no people in it. It's this kind of place that is full of possibility, almost like a Eden. But is this Eden? I mean, is this location actually utopia? Not for many of the people who are being brought to this country and coming in contact with one another for the first time. So that's kind of where my project is going to stem from. I'm looking for objects in the Newark Museum's collection, things that tell other stories about the same period of time. So on the left of the slide, you can see Sojourner Truth, a beautiful photograph of Sojourner Truth. This is not from the collection, but she grew up and was raised and born on a farm in New York, in northern New York, in the same region that Arthur Durand's painting was being made. This image on the right is a fantastic Charles White image of Booker T. Washington and Sojourner Truth. And it's images like these, alternative stories like these, that I want to bring into the American Landscape Gallery to kind of retell these foundational stories of American identity. This is a fantastic Sanford Plummer watercolor painting, and it's a creation myth. It's a Seneca creation myth that was painted in 1970, but the Seneca people were also a part of this place. So they're not represented in Durand's landscape. They're not represented in the Hudson River School paintings, but what other kinds of creation myths were there? What other kinds of stories were people telling about this place? So this kind of brings me to the way that I've made work in the past. I kind of loved that this overmantel and my video installation, Landscape of Anticipation, had a kind of similar format. My Landscape of Anticipation is very, very different from the landscape in this overmantel. I build these places, I build spaces, and this is a video installation that was presented at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati last year. And then I fill them with people. They're kind of congregation places. They're spaces for possibility. They're spaces for people to collect and congregate and communicate. And they can happen inside and they can happen outside. So this is a performance project I worked on with Amy Meredith Cox for the Contemporary Art Center Cincinnati and Artworks Cincinnati as a part of the Blink Festival. So it's a performance project as well as a large-scale video installation and mural on the streets of Cincinnati. The places also are spaces where people can kind of immerse themselves in light and then tell their own stories. These are two people I don't know, but they've posted themselves immersed in one of my video projections on social media. And then this is the closing image of my presentation. And I really, really love it because the woman who posted this to her social media feed writes, "Let the universe guide you. Nothing happens until something moves. Be fearless. We are all connected to the universe in ways that we may not understand. Mourning brings community together. Let's stay together, even after healing." And I just kind of want to close with those words, with the formal part of my presentation, because I love the kind of possibility and also the kind of sadness of that quotation, that she started to tell her own story using these spaces that I build. And this is the kind of project that I'll be working on for the Newark Museum in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Saya. That was really great. I forgot to remind all of our guests, all of our collaborators on this program that you're really welcome, and we encourage you to ask questions for Saya to take up, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or if you're joining us through Facebook, you can put your questions into the comments section, and we'll get them that way as well. But so while we're kind of waiting for some audience questions, Saya, I wanted to ask you, first of all, how does this project feel different to you? Because I know you've done similar site-specific installations. Your imagery is by now, I think, really very recognizable for people who love your work. So how is the Newark Museum of Art project feeling different to you from the past? And I know you have a ways yet, you're still in the kind of research and development stage of the exhibition, but how do you foresee doing, how will this have a particular Newark imprint on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so I didn't do a full presentation of my work here today, obviously, but the foundation of my practice kind of was established with a project that I developed while I was living in northeastern Brazil. And I spent a lot of time thinking about folkloric performance traditions, and also working with folkloric performance practitioners in northeastern Brazil. Brazil has a similar history of slavery and colonialism as we do here in North America, in the United States. But the story is a little bit different. You know, the way that people perceive race there is different than here in the United States. And when I started making my project, this kind of project called The Empathics, the imprint of that research in Brazil really was quite strong. So what I'm hoping to do with this project at the Newark Museum, kind of thinking about these American landscape paintings, is to think about American folklores, like North American folklores, specifically about, you know, these kind of foundational narratives, these foundational images that construct the way that we perceive what being American, North American from the United States are. And then incorporate that very specifically into my practice. You know, that's a major part of how I think that this is going to be very different for me as an artist. Another thing that, you know, we've already been engaged with is working specifically with people in Newark. I think that's very, very important to me as well. Most of my projects are site-specific in some way, and working with the students from Rutgers Newark, working with Shine Portrait Studio, working with, you know, community partners in Newark, so that the stories that I'm telling, the environments that I'm building, actually connect to local narratives and local people as well. I think those are the two major ways that the work is kind of transforming for me right now.
Great. Yeah, I love the fact that there's that contrast between, I think one of the terms that's sometimes used to describe your work is Afrofuturism, and I know it's much more complicated than that, but the idea that you're looking at these very historical and very kind of canonical ideas of what American is, what American art is, and enlarging on that, I think is exciting. And let's see, here's a good question. How is this time, COVID-19, influencing how you think about your work and the role of artists in general?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really complicated. You know, as I was putting together the presentation, I, you know, realized how my work really is predicated on the ability of people to interact with these spaces and interact with one another. And in a moment of social distancing, in a moment of social isolation, how does one do that? How does one connect? And I think as I, you know, developed this project, and as, you know, we kind of understand the reality of this timeline, like what is the timeline? I'm sure that the way that I think about the project will completely transform. One way I already have been thinking about, how to engage people in social spaces that are not physical is thinking about virtual reality. So virtual reality wasn't really a space I was particularly interested in before COVID-19. I had experimented with it a little bit and played around with it, but it really felt like such a kind of singular space that wasn't about people coming together and collectively experiencing things with one another. But in a moment of social distancing, how do you actually create social spaces? I mean, these virtual worlds that we're living in can become potentially a really important lifeline for us. Like I've spent a fair amount of time on Zoom meetings, connecting with friends and family and relatives, and virtual spaces are becoming increasingly appealing as possibilities for connecting and creating artworks.
That's so interesting. And I think we all experience that to varying degrees. Like some people just hate the digital medium, but whether you like it or not, or if it's natural, it's so necessary right now that I agree there's a certain, like, oh, I kind of got over the anxiety that I had, or the piece of that virtual experience that I don't think I like. It's what we've got now. So it is a good kind of nudge. And here's another good question. Do you ever connect music to your works?
Oh yeah, there's I've been really blessed. I've worked with some really fantastic musicians. Dmitry Gurovich is somebody who has made tons and tons of music for me and for my projects. So generally there is a very sonic component to the work. I've also collaborated with Paul Miller, DJ Spooky, to have tracks made for the projects that I've worked on. So sound really does play a major component of the work. When you see them as stills, obviously it's a very, very different thing. I think it's challenging in stills to understand how immersive and total the experiences that I build are.
And so can you just remind me too, for instance, the piece that you created for the planetarium at the Newark Museum, that has an original soundtrack, right?
It does.
Or does it?
It does. And that was as I said, it was my first foray into digital video. And my husband actually made some of the music for the planetarium show.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
So here's another question. Where are you from and how has that impacted your worldview as an artist?
Maybe I can ask a follow-up question. What do you mean by that?
Well, you can interpret, we don't have a back and forth that I'm aware of, but you can interpret that as you choose.
Sure. Well, I'm from the United States, and I grew up here in Scarsdale, New York. I spent a fair amount of time back and forth between here and Japan as a child because my mother is Japanese from Japan, but I'm American.
And let's see, another question. Who or what would you credit as your biggest influence? If you can, we could ask you to maybe, if you can't think of just one, what are some of your like really critical influences?
Sure. So one of my major influences is the science fiction writer Octavia Butler. When I was in graduate school, I encountered her books for the first time, and I was trying to kind of come up with ways to create these immersive worlds that dealt with very complicated issues. She is considered a kind of science fiction feminist Afrofuturist, but she is somebody who builds these whole worlds where people, they're usually, they're Americans. They're generally from the United States, from all walks of life, all races, like many cultures, are come together in some way and have to deal with very difficult circumstances, often the kind of end of a cult of civilization, and kind of rebuild. So she's been instrumental in my thinking ever since the beginning of making art.
I'm gonna have to look her up.
Oh, really? You don't know? Oh, she's a treat. She's amazing.
So I'm gonna ask a follow-up related question in the world of visual art. What did you study? You didn't study multimedia, new media per se. Like, what is your background from like a conventional art practice? And maybe from there, are there artists that inspired you early on that you've stuck with as a kindred spirit?
So I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I also, as a graduate student, and I didn't go to an undergraduate program that was a fine art program. I went to Brown, which was a liberal arts school, and I guess both schools are very interdisciplinary. At Brown, there were no majors. We had concentrations. And at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, even though I have an MFA in sculpture, I was studying with Faith Wilding in performance, and Candida Alvarez in painting, and Jeffrey Scholar in film, video, and new media. And Greg Bordowitz as well. So, I really had a pretty eclectic and interdisciplinary education. And I continue to kind of think of my practice that way. I don't think of myself as medium specific. I make these total kind of experiences, and oftentimes they start in drawing and painting. So actually the virtual background that I have right now comes from a collage that I made. And the collage starts with handmade paper that's painted and then scanned into the computer. And then I can use that handmade painting, that handmade paper, these elements that actually start in, the physical world, and then replicate them and turn them into digital video installation. And I constantly work that way, where the things that I'm making in the physical world are then brought into the digital world and then come back out into the physical world. So those cloud skins, the two pieces that are in the Newark Museum's collection, they're digital prints on silk that are hand sewn in two pieces of silk. But they're all of the imagery comes from hand painted paper paintings that are digitized, and then also became digital videos as well.
Right. So there's a kind of a back and forth, and one thing feeds the other. And I find that also really great that you've got very traditionally handmade sketches that you start with, and then it can go in almost any direction. And yeah, one related question is what about the Herbarium collection? How does that, I mean, I know that was a real kind of moment of great connection for you with the collections. It's an aspect of our collections that not a lot of people know about or get to see. So can you just describe for people a little bit how the plants relate to your larger body of work?
Sure. Yeah. So the project that I've been working on since about 2006 is a project called The Empathics. And the Empathics are kind of this fictional race of people. It kind of functions like a storybook, who are part plant and part human, and change gender and color and transform back into the landscape when they die. And so there's this kind of element of thinking about like human beings and their relationship to nature constantly in my practice. when I found out that the Newark Museum had this fantastic lending collection, which really isn't as active now, but has traditionally been a kind of educational lending collection where people could touch and feel objects from, the collection. I was really interested in that component of the herbaria. I was interested in like what can one learn from looking at these objects that were collected? Why were people collecting these specific plants? Because it's also a kind of hobbyist practice. It's not something, it's a scientific practice as well, but it's a practice that I engage in actually. Like I'll walk around where I am right now, collecting plants and preserving them. And from interacting with the students in the eco art class, one of the students mentioned that he loved this idea that, the herbaria, this collection of plants, could potentially be the only storehouse of these plants that exist anywhere in the world, this kind of seed laboratory or library. And that kind of concept really resonates with me. And I imagine that that's going to actually impact and influence the way that I create the installation for the Global Contemporaries Gallery in 2021.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Another follow-up question to about Octavia Butler. Do you have a favorite book by Octavia Butler that you want to share?
Yeah, so for those who are less inclined towards science fiction, I think Kindred is a really wonderful place to start. It's a really fantastic book, but my favorites, I actually don't really have favorites. I've actually reread all of her books maybe 3 or 4 times. And each series has a kind of unique contribution, and they're really, really exciting to read if you've never read them before.
Another question about the Oculus installation. Someone asked if it's permanent. I know that's not the case, right? But
Yeah.
is there any kind of future iteration of that, or any idea of bringing it back? I mean, Saya, you've done so many amazing site-specific projects right in New York City. Maybe, yeah, if you could speak to that particular piece, but then maybe also what is on view still, the basketball court project. Maybe if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so that piece is no longer on view. It was commissioned by the Art Production Fund as a collaboration with the Westfield Mall. And it was temporary, but I do have a piece that is permanent that is up in Marcus Garvey Park. It's a basketball court mural, and it's a really, really beautiful basketball court that, when I had the opportunity to paint a mural for it, I was really excited about, because it's actually where my dad played basketball when he was a kid, because he grew up like right around there in Harlem and also in the Bronx. And that basketball court was where he learned how to play ball, and he went to college partially on a basketball scholarship. So the mural there is called Alley Oop, and which is an assisted jump shot, and it's there permanently. So if you have a chance to check it out, please do.
Yeah, so I haven't been to see it, but in reproduction, it's just great because whoever plays ball on that court becomes part of one of your environments in a way. And it's especially overhead, beautiful. The balance between narrative and just beautiful sensorial experiences in your work is, I think, one of the reasons that make it so engaging and so accessible for people. That, like, if you come in purely out of like a sense of awe for the color and the design, then the other pieces kind of come through. Let's see, you have a comment here that says, I feel like your work overlaps with mysticism and folklore. Are there any spiritual themes or traditions that you research for your work, or threads that connect different projects?
So it's interesting. I am obviously deeply invested in thinking about folklore and mythology. I think about folklore and mythology both as potential problems because they can obscure the reiteration of folklores can obscure the possibility of new kinds of narratives or other narratives emerging. But I also love telling stories. I also love to try and create new mythologies and new folklores. So I kind of have this, twofold relationship with folklore in my work. The reason why I studied the folkloric performance traditions in northeastern Brazil when I was first starting out as an artist was because they're these incredible performance traditions that come out of a very kind of rural and not wealthy place that is a place where kind of slavery was really significant in Brazil. And so the stories that are told in these incredible performances are often about, relationships of slaves and masters, but they're tied to these beautiful, intricate, kind of syncretic Afro-Brazilian and Christian religious practices. So there you have this kind of religious practice combined with folklore, combined with like radical social masquerading and upheaval, all in a single kind of series of performance traditions that are happening, once a month on the streets in this like incredibly beautiful UNESCO heritage site. So I do kind of think about these things a lot in my practice, but I have a kind of complicated relationship with them.
And is you use that word masquerade. Is that something that you have kind of brought in a particular way since Brazil, or is it something?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that every project I make is about masquerade. Mm-hmm. It's about masquerade and play and transformation and having everyday people perform new ways of interacting with one another. Like the performance for the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati was a collaboration with anthropologist and dancer Amy Meredith Cox. And the premise of that project was speaking with and thinking with Black women activists in Cincinnati to think about new ways of moving through the streets, and then inviting people, audience members, to participate in this new form of movement. So, that it's I guess utopian in a way, but it's also about enacting those kind of utopian visions through forms of masquerade and performance.
Well, it'll be exciting to see how that's going to be realized in your show for 2021.
Absolutely.
Right? Because I know there's like so many things still to be sorted out, but there is that consistent desire to bring people in and activate the space, and audience participation and community engagement beyond the scope of just a visual art show, which is ambitious and seems to have worked well in the past. So another question from one of our visitors has, have you given any thought to how your works will be preserved in the future at such point where digital video may become obsolete? Is that something that you have already planned for? And yeah, I think for those of us who deal with museum collections, it's always an interesting question, trying to provide for the unforeseen changes in technologies. So what do you think, Saya?
I mean, the only things that I can say are, you know, based on my experience. And the last image in my presentation is of a digital video installation that is at the Seattle Art Museum. And it was commissioned by the Seattle Art Museum for an exhibition called Disguise that I was in about 4 or 5 years ago. Curated by Pam McCluskey, and that digital video installation is in their permanent collection. They acquired the digital video installation, and as a part of that acquisition, a number of archival copies of the video had to be provided in various formats. The Whitney Museum also owns my work in digital video, and again, like when they acquired the work, it was they had a whole series of different kind of formats that they required the digital video to be saved in so that they could preserve and archive the work for future generations.
So it is a consideration, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not, you know, when I first started making work, it wasn't, I wasn't thinking like, oh, how can I archive this work? How can this work be kept for posterity? But as I've been producing it and as it's been acquired by private collectors and also institutions, you know, that definitely is a consideration.
So another question about your iconography, Saya, can you speak at all, if it's relevant, to the influence of sacred geometries or that kind of a golden mean, any of those, I think more mystical, but based in this idea of the geometric. Do those relate to your work at all?
Sure. I mean, I'm always, you know, a lot of the work that I make is symmetrical and kind of balanced. I think more about cosmologies in general. Like that's kind of how sacred geometry and mysticism comes into my work. I've spent a fair amount of time looking at the ways in which cosmological diagrams are constructed. And I've attempted to kind of use similar formats for, you know, telling the stories that I tell. I was raised Christian, but I was also partially raised Shinto and Buddhist, spending time with my grandmother in Japan. And so I think kind of Buddhism and spiritual traditions of Shinto and Buddhism have inspired and influenced the way that I not only make things, but the presences that I try to give people in the spaces that I build. So there's kind of an animist interest as well. Like what are the spirits and the objects around us? I am interested in that. So I think there is some of that in the work. There definitely is.
I like that. And here's another question. I'm getting some great questions here. Do you have a favorite plant, Saya?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have a lot of plants, and I don't have a favorite plant. I love plants, and I love my plants. I love my plants so much that when we came up here, we brought all of our plants, all of our house plants from our apartment in Brooklyn. With us. So we have a whole room of plants, which we're caring for and we love dearly.
And is it correct or fair to say that so far the research you've been doing at the museum has been specifically with medicinal plants?
Yes. So far it's been about medicinal plants. I mean, I think I may kind of shift a little bit and think more about the minerals in the collection as well. I mean, I just love that, you know, Dr. Disbrow and Mr. Dana, when they founded the museum, had this interest in objects from the natural world, things from the natural world, creating this kind of archive of the natural world, and building a science collection, and then giving people, just like everyday people, access to those things as teaching tools, so we can think more about the natural world and our relationship to it. I think it might expand, but yeah, so far it's been primarily about medicinal plants.
Sorry, I'm looking for a question I wanted to come back to from a fellow artist mother, wondering how has your experience with motherhood changed the content and or the process of your practice? Mm-hmm. And can you speak to support systems you've utilized that allowed you to continue to do both of those vital practices?
Yeah, no, it's been a real challenge. There are lots of different things. I'm really lucky. My family lives close by. I mean, obviously they're being quite socially distant right now. But my parents were great support. My husband's mother helped us a lot when she was very small. Now she's 8, so it's a little bit easier. But in this moment of COVID, we're now homeschooling our daughter because public school is closed. And it's been a real challenge. It's really, really difficult. But before this happened, I even collaborated with my daughter on projects, which was really incredible. She and I did a series of murals together for the Sugar Hill Children's Museum. So I designed a series of murals based on drawings that she made, because I was spending so much time looking at these like incredibly beautiful abstract drawings that she was working on. We also collaborated on a project for the ICA in Boston. A few years ago, she was learning coding at school, and because she was learning coding and I wanted to kind of engage with her with things that she was learning, we partnered at the ICA with Scratch MIT, which is a coding platform for children, which is what she was learning at school, to create an installation in their education department, which was a collaboration with my daughter. So, I've attempted to kind of create projects and opportunities where I can spend time with her and be inspired by her, and for her to feel like she has a voice also in these kind of large scale spaces. And that's been quite meaningful to me as a mother.
I suppose it helps when your child takes an interest in what you're doing in a constructive way, right?
Yes. Well, she's constantly now trying to work on my drawings. She's like, when's our next show?
Healthy ego, that's good. So I think we're almost out of time. I got one more question that I wanted to pass along, which is, have you thought about animating your work, or have you done that already? In terms of like being able to reach a wider audience, or are you committed to this idea of the art environment? I know some of your site-specific installations have gone beyond, obviously, the specifically art setting, but what are the possibilities for something? Are you interested in film?
I've made a number of videos that are more narrative. I've never worked on a film project. I mean, I would be interested in working on a film project. And, to me, part of the reason why I make the work that I make and the way that I make my work is about it not just being for an art audience. So the performance project for the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, and that mural, the large scale mural, is just, it's in the street. Although, when you look at a photograph of it, it's difficult to understand. I've gotten comments from, regular people on my social media, like sending me private messages saying like, I'm not an art connoisseur, and I love seeing this mural every day when I commute to work on the bus. And it really lights up my day every time I get a comment like that.
Yeah, that's great. That's true. It should be in our perfect world and in utopia, right? Everybody has the same access to everything. Saya, thank you so much for your time and your openness, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We will look for you next week when we'll have another special guest, and also this Saturday we hope you can join the virtual museum for our community day, and we're going to have a number. You can check our website, you can check our Facebook for more details about that, but we'll have another artist conversation with Willie Cole on Saturday. So trying to keep a nice, good connections going inside and outside of the museum, and everybody keep well. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.